Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone from around the world who's joining this session. And I'm delighted that you've made the time to be with us for this launch of the second in our Air Transport 2035 reports. I want to start by thanking my fellow panelists for being here. Zoom is giving Karin Gylin a little trouble letting her in. It's desperately trying to validate her credentials, which is a good sign for security, I guess, but not one for her frustration, but we will get her in. I would also like to say a very big thank you to our sponsors, UiPath. As many of you may know, UiPath are one of the world leaders in robotic process automation and applying the technology to really help organizations maximize human potential by automating the tasks that we don't need to do. And here's Karin. I've never been so happy to see someone pop up on my screen. And so with that, what I'm going to do is pass around to each of the panelists in turn and ask them to just say 15 seconds about who they are and what they do. And I'm going to go around clockwise on my screen as I see you. So I'm going to start with Marta. And if you could unmute yourself, Marta.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marta, and I'm the editor of Future Travel Experience. So for those of you who aren't familiar with FT, we focus on how innovation can help the air transport industry redefine the passenger experience and drive the business performance forward. And through our media and events and other initiatives such as the FT Innovation Hub, for example, we create a platform for collaboration where industry leaders can share insights and knowledge, which is of course extremely important during this current crisis. We became a part of the Apex family as well last year, which has really helped us accelerate our mission. And we have also been working very closely with Rohit and Fast Future on this report. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the latest findings and discussing with the fellow panelists. Thank you for having me, Rohit.
Our pleasure. Clyde, you're next on my clockwise screen.
Okay. Hi, I'm Clyde Hutchinson. I am through being partner at Journey Partners involved in two main projects. First as founder of Viva Air Labs, which is the first innovation labs associated with an airline and also travel in South America, based in Medellin in Colombia. And also as a co-lead of Propeller Shannon, which is a startup fund for travel and aviation startups supported by Boeing, Datalex, Enterprise Ireland, and the Irish Aviation Authority.
Excellent. And Karin, delighted that Zoom finally gave up on trying to bar your entry and that you stayed persistent in the face of proofs of whether or not you were a robot. So thank you for joining us. Do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm head of innovation at Swedavia Airports, 10 airports in Sweden. The largest one is Arlanda in Stockholm. I head up our innovation department that works as a support function for the entire company. So we help accelerate ideas and innovations within Swedavia.
Karin, the voice is coming through a little bit tinny. I don't know if there's anything you can do about that or get a little bit closer to your mic maybe. Satyaki, your turn. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Rohit. Delighted to be here. I'm Satyaki Raghunath. I'm the Chief Strategy and Development Officer at Bangalore International Airport. Amongst other things, the strategy and development vertical also leads digital transformation innovation. We're India's third busiest airport, and we're very happy to be here and discuss some of our learnings, especially through the COVID crisis, and what we believe the future of travel and transportation is going to be, with innovation and digital transformation leading the way.
Thank you all. So you're going to hear from these four industry experts over the course of the next 2 hours, but where we'll start is that I'm going to take everyone through just some of the emerging findings from the report that we've released today. And as you know, these reports are free to airlines and airports and government agencies, and just $50 to everyone else as a way of trying to help us cover the costs of producing them. And today we're very pleased, as I say, to have the people you've just heard introduce themselves. And what we'll do is I'll talk for a little while about some of the interesting findings coming from the study. We'll then have them reflect on that, and then each in turn will talk about what they're doing, what they're seeing, and what they're planning around innovation and digital transformation. And once again, a big thank you to our sponsors who really been very supportive in making this happen, and their commitment to seeing industries explore what their future might be as we navigate our way through and past the pandemic, assuming that there is a past the pandemic. So let me take you straight into the report. This is the second in the series. The first looked at how COVID-19 was impacting the sector and scenarios for the future of the sector. And we know those have been very well received, and there's been a lot of discussion and coverage. This latest report wants to dive a lot deeper into these specific themes of what are organizations doing around innovation and digital transformation. So we did a combination of an online survey running for about a month, desk research, interviews, and a couple of webinars on airports and then airlines and aircraft over the last few weeks with Future Travel Experience. And we've drawn on all that input, something close to 1,000 ideas submitted through those different discussion forums that we've distilled into this report. Let's start with the survey part of the report. So we had 234 respondents to this. And the first thing was, what are we expecting or already doing in the terminal environment? And what we can see is very strong focus on the idea of social distancing, getting in place that queue management, and I'll talk more about some of the solutions later. But also the visibility of cleaning was seen as very important, getting PPE in, and then this whole area of testing, and I'll come back to that. And again, there's a lot of debate about whether we should be testing passengers before they get to the airport, having them self-certify, or having a more trustless system where they have to produce some form of certificate, and we'll come back on that. One of the most interesting areas that is in the conversation, we're hearing a lot of people talking about starting experiments around the use of AI and robotics. And again, I'll talk about some more examples, but actually in terms of the level of support for that, what you see is, and not so much seen here, but on the next slide, less focus on that. And here very clearly a sense of we'll do everything we can to make the passengers safe, to make the airport clean, to encourage them to come back, but very low support for the ideas of cutting the number of flights, cutting the time between flights, and reducing the number of passengers in the airport. And we've heard various different estimates, but people say that their modeling suggests that if you wanted to have 1 meter spacing, that would reduce the number of passengers you could have in the terminal by up to 50%, and 2 meter spacing would reduce the number of passengers by 75%, both of which are seen as economically non-viable in the medium to long term. The second area was around technology, and I've already given the game away in saying that a lot of those things that we talked about around using robotics and AI had less support than we were expecting in terms of cleaning and sanitization and managerial, but a real focus here on removing any kind of touch point, the entire touchless journey, using biometrics. So from curb to cabin, can we have a situation where you never touch anything? Giving you more self-service where that's not possible, and using the technology more and more to identify who might have symptoms, to track them through the journey, and to guide people as they navigate their way through the airport and more complex processes now that are required to make sure that everyone is safe and in the right place at the right time and not doing the wrong things. From a cabin perspective, again, cleaning and sanitization, personal protection, more communication to the passengers about the procedures on board, the deboarding procedures, what's going to happen at the airport you're arriving at. But again, real reluctance around the idea of removing seats or blocking seats, blocking rows, putting dividers between passengers. Again, there's a sense that economically these are just not viable options. And we need to make sure that whether it's through air filtration or all the other things we're doing, we're making the cabin an incredibly safe place. and not making it economically difficult for airlines to survive by choosing options that are just not sustainable in the long term. Industry collaboration has come up very strongly through all the conversations. This is seen as a golden opportunity to really get the industry starting to work together, with nearly 85% believing that this is going to happen. And what we do see is we've seen IATA and ACI come together with a joint set of protocols, and we're seeing more and more airlines and airports saying we need a collaborative approach. We need governments to talk to each other, to have consistent processes around things like quarantine. We need consistent guidance from ICAO on things like social distancing, PPE, sanitization, so that we really do have a consistent passenger experience, particularly if they're connecting somewhere, that the airport experience, the plane experience, the departure experience, the arrival experience, all feel like they're being operated to the same standard. Very interesting discussion around what this all means for innovation and digital transformation. And what we see here is around 2/3 of respondents are saying that this is actually going to accelerate their investment in innovation and digital transformation, as it's seen as a real opportunity to both deliver those safety and security measures, but also to drive more efficient operations, and then take that one stage further and to identify ways of driving people back into the skies and generating new and alternative revenue sources. So this is seen as a great opportunity if we can get it right, if we can develop the right skills, and if we can bring the right kind of mindset to bear to think digitally and to think about how do we run a data-centric organization. And that's translated into people's spending plans. Obviously, over 70 people didn't know or couldn't say what was happening to their spending. So we've only focused on those who expressed an opinion. But what we see here is that 75% say that their spending is either going to stay the same or increase, with nearly 50% expecting an increase, and just over 30% expecting an increase of over 25%. So despite the financial constraints, there's a real sense that we have to make that commitment to spending. So when we looked at those sort of 1,000+ ideas we were given of what people were doing behind this, what we saw was that it was hard to categorize them in terms of timescale for when they might be implemented. What was more interesting was the nature of the ideas. And we saw 3 broad categories. There were a set of core actions that were pretty much being adopted by everyone or considered by everyone, either now or in the coming months. And they're pretty common, and you could see those happening in most airlines, most airports around the world, either now or soon. Then there were the advanced things that people were pursuing, trialing, or considering that they thought might enhance the passenger experience or do something to enhance their operational efficiency and effectiveness. But they didn't necessarily think that these were going to impact customer decisions on whether to fly, but they would certainly make the experience better or make it easier to do things on a more consistent basis. So a lot of this was around using technology to automate operations. And then there was a third really interesting area where these are things that those who are doing them thought these could be potential differentiators for them. And they could potentially deliver anywhere between a 10 and 1,000% improvement in specific areas of activity because of the nature of what they're doing, the way they're transforming processes, the way they're bringing new opportunities to bear. And these are, over very different timeframes that they might be implemented. And so that, for me, was one of the most interesting areas of the report. What we also found was that an awful lot of the ideas were common to both airports. So we saw a number of different domains of applications. And there were a whole group, trust and confidence, commercial, etc., that many of the ideas were common to both airlines and airports. And then there was a second category of ideas which were very specific to either an airport or an airline. So you can see those broken down. So what I'm going to do is just talk you through some of the examples of what's been done and use some of the case start examples we've highlighted in the report to bring those to life. The first is clearly an incredible focus on cleaning and sanitization. a huge number of different processes, mechanisms, cleaning fluids, and strategies being adopted. The key thing seems to be around being visible, that the passenger and other stakeholders can see that we're doing this, can see a big step up in the attention to cleaning, that it's core to everyone's, if you like, focus inside the organization, and that everyone working in the airport or on an airplane really has cleaning at the heart of their priority list. And alongside visibility, you're also seeing some new innovations emerging. So, for example, this is Pittsburgh Airport, who are trying these ultraviolet cleaning robots, and we're seeing those again in Hong Kong, at Hamad International Airport, and Hamad's also pioneered the idea of a luggage disinfectant tunnel. So really trying to automate the processes that they hope will then stay for a long time. That's taken one stage further, where again, Hong Kong are pioneering this idea of disinfection chambers. There's a strong focus on how do we make sure the staff who are most present in the airport are both protected, but also we can convince customers that the staff are being tested and cleansed, if you like, on a regular basis. So they're pioneering the idea of using these disinfection chambers to do deep disinfection of everyone before they enter the terminal environment. Huge range of different chemical solutions, antimicrobial coatings, and different approaches being adopted. And we list a number of those in the report. I think what's clear is it's early days yet. These seem to be promising. Some people are seeing incredible results. Some are claiming incredible results. A number of vendors offering the moon in terms of what their solution can do. And I think we're at we're in very early stages right now, but there seems to be a lot of hope that these can not only be very effective in terms of the immediate impact in cleaning and protection, but also some of these might have quite a long-lasting impact. So, for example, Hong Kong are looking at antimicrobial coatings that might have a 90-day life, which obviously feeds well into the goal of efficiency. Many airports, in fact, most, I think, are pursuing this path of acceleration of self-service. And we see Avalon from Victoria in Australia hopes to be the first airport in Australia that pioneers a fully self-service approach. We're also seeing a focus on how do we take out process. So we've gone from, having immigration do a bunch of the processes when we turn up at an airport to doing more and more of those ourselves. Now the view is, well, can we push those onto the plane to remove the dwell time in the airport, to remove the risk in the airport? But ultimately, the question is, can we take these out of the airport completely and out of the travel journey? And shouldn't these be done before you complete your travel booking? That actually, if we think laterally, if we're not going to let you into a country, then why would we sell you a ticket? Let's do this first. Or if you need to have a conversation with customs authorities or with immigration authorities before you travel, let's do all that before you make your booking and build it into the booking process. It also increases safety. And then, we're seeing this notion, we're going to hear Bangalore talk more about this, of really making the entire journey from curb to cabin entirely touch-free, so that you're minimizing the risk of contact with others throughout the experience. And really, it's your responsibility then to make sure that the device you're using is well disinfected and cleaned on a regular basis. A lot of different discussions around testing and certification. We've seen people like Emirates now pioneering the use of antigen testing in the airport with potentially 10-minute turnaround. Vienna are also doing this at a charge. Iceland, Keflavik Airport is starting to introduce it at a charge. Others are saying, no, we really shouldn't let someone into the airport who hasn't been tested. We actually need to keep this outside. So whether this is done in the car park or before you get there. And then there's the question of whether some are saying, let's take a trusted approach where you self-certify. Others are taking their lead from the kind of blockchain notion of trustless solutions. So where you have some sort of certificate, whether that's a physical certificate, a stamp in your passport, a digital token of some kind, that says that either you've been antigen tested, antibody tested, or eventually vaccinated, so that we're only letting those people in, and we can manage processes in the airport according to which category you fall into, and segregate within the airport and maybe even on the plane according to those categories. A huge amount of effort going into different approaches to screening and scanning, whether that's the use of robots, whether that's the use of remote scanning devices, and we're seeing a number of airports pioneering now remote heat sensing devices, remote body temperature monitoring devices. But also, again, we've seen Hamad pioneer this wearable technology that allows us to screen a passenger for potential temperature rises. Obviously, none of these are perfect, but everyone is trying to find solutions that can work today, but also be viable in the longer term. And we're in that test phase right now, where a lot of these ideas are being trialed, are being rolled out on a larger scale. Some inevitably will be refined. Others will be rolled out to full scale, and we'll see them being adopted on a more wide scale basis. A lot of different discussion around shielding and seat separation. I've touched on the seat separation piece before. There's a sense that that's really not viable. It makes it very difficult, particularly if you have people who are handicapped or low mobility. Navigating around shields in economy where there's less space becomes very difficult. But you've seen Delta introduce shielding into the airport concourse itself as a way of protecting airport staff and passengers and vice versa, and starting to put them in critical places around the terminal. Again, the question is, how long will we need these and how sustainable will they be? Most airlines and airports now are taking some sort of approach to staff PPE and encouraging passenger PPE, although there's an inconsistency still. We're seeing some airlines going the full hog and having staff wearing medical gowns throughout the flight. There's an issue of comfort. Some of the ideas coming through the study were whether we could start to pioneer new materials which built PPE into the clothing itself and allowed for either single-use clothing with PPE or reusable PPE clothing that was just like a normal uniform. Taking that a stage further, that's also been extended to all of the things that go into an aircraft, things like pillows and blankets. Some people taking them out, some saying they're wrapping them before putting them on the plane for business and first class in long haul. Others saying, well, can we have single-use versions of this or takeaway versions? So you literally take these with you when you leave the plane, and there's a lot less to deal with for the cleaning staff on the plane. Obviously, huge cost implications, whichever route you take. A lot of conversations around how do we reconfigure public spaces. Lots of different AI tools being looked at and modeling tools to help with this at different passenger volumes and different flight frequencies. This is Air New Zealand, who've reconfigured their lounge to build in social distancing. And I think we're going to see a lot more examples of this, of people really building it into their designs. As I mentioned earlier, a growing use of technology tools to track passengers around the airport, monitor their movements, monitor potential blockages in social distance, monitor potential areas where temperatures are building up because of growing numbers of people, monitoring individuals who might have higher temperatures and need to be identified. And you're also using tools to simulate flows through and look at, with different social distancing mechanisms, what might that do to the time it takes us to get through those processes and get to the plane, but also giving that information to passengers in real time so they know how long it's going to take to get through the airport today when they're starting their journey, and they can manage their time accordingly. A lot of focus also on risk removal. This isn't a brilliant picture, but what we see is Singapore now, in the desire to take paper off the plane, have put about 150 publications onto their app. There's a lot of airlines now moving towards taking off any kind of metal cutlery and moving to single-use cutlery, ideally renewable, so that there's no question of washing or has this been washed before, how well has it been washed, that it is single-use, it's completely sanitized before use and thrown away afterwards. Again, there are always questions about how ecologically sound are the disposal processes, and that I think will get more and more focus as we go on. And then a couple of other areas that are really in that third category of potential disruptors, potential huge improvement opportunities. This is accelerating a number of organizations' evaluation of the use of autonomous vehicles, both to bring people to and from the airport, but also to move people and goods around the airport. And could this reduce the amount of human contact, make it easier to clean, adopt more self-cleansing materials within the vehicles, and start to use robots more to manage transport and parking lots so that we're minimizing the amount of human contact. Obviously, there's a huge questions there about the implications on jobs. And finally, AI. Although there wasn't a strong support for this in the survey, what's very clear from the ideas being put forward is people are really looking now at AI in quite fundamental ways and asking questions about how do we start to embed this in everything that we do? And how do we start to look at not just front office processes, not just automation of processes like baggage handling, but in all the things we do back office, in all the areas where we're moving paper, how do we eliminate that? In all the areas where we're trying to coordinate between airlines and airports and air traffic control, can AI and potentially blockchain be pulled together to give us single views of the truth and start to manage these more complex disruptions we're having as a result of this? And so the ultimate challenge we see here is there are some incredible ideas. There's some great stuff being done. There's a lot of interesting stuff being trialed and some great ideas from the future, for the future. But what we've heard consistently from everyone involved is that it is really damn hard to plan here because we don't know how things are going to play out. We don't know what recovery paths are going to look like. We don't know how long it's going to take to get us to economic viability. When will we return to 2019 levels? What will the shape and patterns of demand be? What areas should we be focusing on? So what we're seeing is a really interesting conversation around airlines now and airports increasingly looking at horizon scanning, near-term and long-term, to understand what might be coming our way. What are the behavioral changes in society that might impact propensity to fly? What are the policy measures being adopted around the world around flying that could impact us? What are the technology solutions? What are the outlooks for economies? And then how do we do scenario planning on a regular basis now, looking at different timeframes to make sure that we're not placing all our faith in one view of the future, but actually preparing for a range of possible futures. And what was heartening was how many people said they were using the scenarios from report one as their planning approach or their basis to sort of test out different strategies. So I'm going to stop sharing there. And what I'm going to do is, before I bring the panel in to give their views, I'm also going to do a quick polling question to get your instant reactions to some of this. So we're going to put a polling question on the screen. The panelists can vote as well. And we'll just tap this up for a minute or so. So vote fast. Don't think about it. First choice, the best one. This is a multiple choice question around what do you see as the priorities for your organization around innovation and digital transformation. So if you see an idea and you like it, you think you're doing it, tick it. What's driving what you're doing right now on your agenda? Okay, another 20 seconds to complete the voting. Okay, let me put the results on screen. Can everyone see that? My panelists are nodding. I'm taking that as an indicator. Karin, you can't see it. Satyaki? Clyde, can you guys see the, yeah, okay. I'm gonna go with at least, if 50% can see it, that's a good win with Zoom at the moment. I think the platform's great. Sometimes there are some issues. So, I mean, it's interesting here that confidence seems to be the key, that without confidence, we're not moving forward. And then, you know, this idea of getting costs down, I totally get. Sanitation next. And then, interestingly, given the focus on it in the report, although there weren't so many suggestions about what people were doing, new revenue sources doesn't get quite as much weighting here as we've seen elsewhere. So what I'm going to do is, let's stop the polling. And let's go around and get some reactions. Karin, as we made you struggle to get in, let's start with you. Let's just go around and get a couple of minutes of reaction from each of you. You know, what you saw in the study and what, you know, what's your reflections on that? Start with you, Karin.
Yeah, and hopefully the sound is better now.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah. Well, what we see that it's a lot of things that we were working on before that are being accelerated, seamless travel, using data in intelligent ways and so on. Maybe in some areas, the technology that we've been looking at is being used at new areas. For example, queue measuring systems or AI video analytics, that we were looking at different use cases now going into more social distancing and other. So I think that's something that is interesting to see how things we've been working on might shift focus somewhat. But self-service is something that we've been working on for a lot of years. So that's something that we'll continue to work on, from checking in to bag drop and so on throughout the process. So that's some reflections on my part.
Great, great. Someone asked how many respondents. The survey had a total of 234 respondents, and when you get the report, you'll see how many responded to each question. Okay, let's take an airline view. Clyde, let's get you on screen and sharing what are your reflections on what you heard there and have read in the report.
A lot of this is, as Karin says, is stuff which we already know. Obviously, my opinion comes from a low-cost point of view, so we've always been looking at making things more efficient. And I think that's now going to be the biggest challenge for more legacy airlines, is the efficiencies which are going to happen. I think one of the big challenges we have is the confidence piece, I think, and that's shown out with the poll of the participants, is how do we build confidence. I also feel that this has served a unique opportunity now for really airlines and airports to finally come together to really develop products and innovation. And I know Bangalore, which is coming after me, has done this really well, looking at how airlines and airports can really come together to drive innovations, where in the past sometimes airline and airports can be at different odds. I think now we have a common cause which we really could drive innovation, and especially digital transformation. I feel above all, this is the moment of finally the moment of digital transformation.
Excellent. Satyaki, let's take your thoughts. What stood out for you from the report?
I think, as Karin and Clyde have already said, we were probably doing some of these things already. And what COVID has done has accelerated the development of some of those initiatives. We were in the process of rolling out 4 major digital platforms. The biggest and the most well-known of them was the DigiYatra platform, which went live last year.
You're going to talk more about those in a second, so let's come back on that. So.
Yeah, so I think there was that. There was a lot of focus already on process automation. I think there's going to be a lot more on that from our perspective. Data analytics was a big area for us. That sort of gained significant traction. I think the one area that we were probably not as focused on earlier, that we've done a lot of in the last 60 days, is the area of sanitation and hygiene and PPE. I certainly think that airports and airlines probably took some of those things for granted, or less importantly, before COVID. And certainly that's become a huge area of focus. So the engineering and maintenance teams and their own abilities for sort of, pushing the boundaries as far as innovation and digital transformation are concerned has taken on sort of new impetus. They've been coming up with new products, new ideas, new ways of sort of thinking about cleaning the environment around the airport and the terminal, and not just in the terminal, but across the campus. And I think that's been huge. The way we've dealt with our staff and staff safety as much as sort of aviation community safety has also been sort of a huge driver over the course of the last 60 days. And these were things that we probably thought of earlier, but maybe didn't pay enough attention to. I certainly think that that's got a heightened sense of importance from a safety and security of our employees, and not just sort of about the airport, but the wider airport and aviation stakeholder community, as well as the passengers. So I think that's been huge over the course of the last 60 days. And I think touchless is certainly going to gain significant traction. And we've trialed a few things, but as you said earlier, I think, Rohit, the big issue is going to be what could we do in the short term versus what would be our priorities for the medium to longer term. And I think because we are sort of early days, even now, as far as COVID is concerned, and things seem to be so fluid in terms of both what we know about the virus itself, as well as the fact that government responses have also had to be reactive rather than proactive in many cases. And there are all these sort of issues between, just as you talked about, for instance, the airline airport issue or the regulatory agency issue between sort of different governments. Equally in countries like India or large countries with large domestic markets like US or Australia, Brazil, etc. I'm sure there are challenges also between a federal and the state governments and between state governments in terms of dealing with the movement of people. We're finding that sort of a new challenge, certainly as we've opened up our domestic market. And I think you will see some of those things as well. So there will be parallels between what we're seeing between countries, but also within countries. I think many of those sorts of collaborative efforts, not just between airlines and airports, but also significantly between all community members within the aviation sort of stakeholder community. All of that will have to get far more coordinated and better, because right now I would sort of politely characterize it as being erratic.
Right. Excellent. Okay, let's thank you for that. Let's bring in Marta then for your perspective.
Thanks, Rohit. First of all, that was a really great presentation with some really great insights. And I think it was very positive that we now see a mindset shift, and digital is becoming central, as my fellow panelists pointed out as well. One thing I wanted to point out is, of course, there is now a growing focus on touchless biometrics and self-service. But I do believe that we should continue to equally focus on development of automation, baggage handling, robotics, and AI, which was something that the study participants voted as a lower priority. And in this respect, I want to echo a sentiment that came up during a recent FT webinar by Finnair's CEO, Toby Manna, who said that even during the hardest of times, airlines and airports need to stay focused on the longer term goals. So in this respect, I do believe that we need to equally focus on artificial intelligence and robotics and automation in terms of baggage handling and these processes.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, well, before we dive in and start looking in more detail at what each of the organizations is doing or thinking about, I just wanted to make a quick comment. We love the comments in the chat. I'm not sure how many of them we'll get to see now, but we like to see the conversation going on between you. What I would encourage you to do is, if you want to make a comment in the chat, there's a drop-down window that says to. And you can choose to all panelists, but then only we see it. And there's another option just below that, which is all panelists and attendees. So make sure you choose that option when you're making comments or replying to people's comments. And then if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box and vote for the questions that you're seeing there that you would most like to see answered. So now we're going to dive a little deeper into the strategies being pursued by each of the different players, and then Marta's going to talk about what she's seeing from an FTE perspective, looking across the piece. So let's start with the airports, and then we'll go on and look at the airline perspective. So Satyaki, let's start with you. Do you want to spend a few minutes just talking to us, let's say 5 minutes, talking to us about, what are some of the things that you're doing right now? And obviously, we've got one big one which we touched on earlier.
Sure, Rohit. I mean, I think firstly, we started seeing signs of COVID and some of its challenges probably as early as January. And although it was not, anywhere close to being in India at that point, I think we have one of the most, I would say, one of the best enterprise risk management teams in the world. And I think they started preparing for it before almost anybody else. And we were starting to do temperature checks and health screening as early as probably late January, as soon as we sort of started thinking about COVID, long before sort of we had cases in India. So we were really looking at it very early on. And we started putting into place a series of measures with respect to how we would have to deal with the potential outbreak of the virus as it was brought in by travelers. As sort of the situation evolved, we started looking at health and sanitation first. And some of those challenges included coordinating with state governments and the central ministry, because many of these things are regulatory and airports can't take arbitrary decisions without sort of the buy-in of either the central ministry of health or the government or the state government in whichever state the airports are located. So in our case, it was the government of Karnataka. So I think we were working exceptionally closely with them, and our team, our operations and enterprise risk management teams were working very, very closely in terms of deciding what sort of protocols we'd have to have, both in terms of screening as well as in terms of, potentially isolating passengers who might show early symptoms or who might potentially be COVID positive, etc. Simultaneously, what we were doing was trying to figure out what sorts of technology we could use in order to make sure that we could use terminal and operational space more efficiently, as well as not have a significant impact on our operations. And I think in the initial days, it was much more focused on sort of the arrivals process and making sure that we thought through sort of how we would use camera technology and thermal screening and things like that for arriving passengers in a big way. And as the situation evolved, it sort of got into transfer passengers, departing passengers, etc. And over the course of the last 60 days, once the lockdown was announced and once sort of India started having cases, I think from our perspective, we started looking at how we could use digital transformation and innovation and technology to try and see how we could, potentially address some of these challenges. I think in the first place, various companies will probably tell you this, but I think COVID did more for digital transformation across the world than probably most initiatives companies sort of took and set out to do. So even if it was sort of accidental and unintentional, I think, we went to remote working for most of our staff. We had a skeleton staff in the airport who sort of provide essential services for the air traffic control tower, for engineering and maintenance, for repatriation flights, for the cargo operations and things like that. But it was still very, very skeleton. I mean, normally we have about 1,200 people working at the airport in terms of the airport staff and 20,000 people across the wider ecosystem. And we were probably down to less than about 300 people during the lockdown period across the airport ecosystem. So that was one issue in terms of, completely moving away from being in the office and finding out ways of working through using tools such as Microsoft Teams or Zoom or various other sort of video and audio conferencing platforms. It also did a lot with respect to file sharing and how do you transfer information across different departments. And I think that was a big issue as far as our ICT teams were involved, because while they were all prepared for something of this scale, this was the first real test in terms of how it works. So both in terms of process automation as well as sort of making sure the systems work, that was big. The second thing that we could do during this time was take a good hard look at how we did sanitation and think about PPE. And I think from that perspective, we spent about 30 of the 60 days going through a significant process of inventory and deep cleaning, not just of the terminal facilities, but across the entire airport campus. In the first place, probably do a full-scale audit of what we were doing for the past 10 years, and then look at what sort of risks there might be in the system with COVID or any other sort of illness that could come later, and then try and figure out what we needed to do with respect to coming up with sanitation procedures and automated cleaning, and trying to think of what we would have to do when we reopened with respect to sanitation and safety of passengers as well as staff. And third aspect focused on digital transformation in the truest sense in terms of data analytics, both from an operational and commercial perspective, as well as looking at how we could use various new technologies with respect to IoT sensors, camera vision, and computer vision with respect to looking at passengers, physical distancing, health, wearing of masks, etc., as well as trying to see how we could accelerate the DigiYatra program or contactless travel that we'd already been trialing for the past year or so. So for those of you who don't know about the DigiYatra program, it was sort of conceptualized at Bangalore Airport, and it's now a more widespread program across the entire Indian airport ecosystem. And the idea is to use your face as your boarding pass. And the whole point of DigiYatra was to, when it started off, was to think about customer experience and how a passenger could go from home all the way to boarding the aircraft without necessarily having to, have their boarding pass stamped or having themselves checked on multiple sort of processing points. And I think what started off as a customer experience initiative has now, with COVID and sort of in the current scenario, turned out to be a godsend in terms of the fact that we've been able to accelerate what we've been doing. Vistara was already on the DigiYatra platform. AirAsia is now in the process of getting integrated into the DigiYatra platform. And we will have all of the domestic airlines integrated probably before October of this year. And what that means is that all the passengers who sort of go through can go from curbside to boarding with just using their facial biometrics as sort of the ID document. And that's also
we're getting a lot of comments in about this process. Can I ask you to just take 2 minutes to literally walk us through what goes on from curbside to cabin? Just what does the passenger now do? How does it all work? Just step us through the key steps in that process.
Sure. So the fundamental idea of DigiYatra was to sort of have a DigiYatra ID or a token that you would register for once. And once you do that, you would link it to every ticket booking that you made. And the first time you traveled, the DigiYatra ID would be linked to your photograph, which would then be verified once. Just in the same way as we used to do in the IRIS system in the UK in years gone by, or the Emirates ID that we had in Dubai airports, for instance. And once you do a single verification, your facial biometrics get stored in a central DigiYatra ID system, which is held by the government. And it's similar to a driving license system or anything else, but it uses your face as your boarding pass. And so every time you then came through.
Just to say to everyone, Satyaki is delivering this in the middle of a monsoon and a thunderstorm, and we were warned that this might happen. So what I'm going to do is, whilst we're waiting for him to come back, I'm going to pop us onto a polling question. Oh, you're back, Satyaki. You're muted though. Let's unmute.
Sorry, I don't know what happened there. So you would
carry on, yeah.
You'd use your face very quick. I mean, let me complete very quickly. But you use your face as the sort of token to enter the terminal for your check-in and bag drop, for your security screening, and at the e-boarding gates with biometrics built in, so that essentially you didn't have to stop at each point, present an ID, show your boarding pass, etc., etc. And that was the ID, the idea of the DigiYatra program. We've rolled it out now with Vistara, and all points of that are live except for the DCS integration, which is ongoing right now and should be ready by June, July. And then we're working now with AirAsia and all the other domestic airlines. But my view is that COVID has given us a perfect opportunity, and we are now in talks with the Indian government as well to try and see how we can potentially expand that to international travel as well, and set up potential green channels between certain airports or on certain airlines, etc., so that will allow passengers to move pretty seamlessly between airports or between destinations.
Great. So I'm going to take a polling question now, and then we're going to take some of the audience questions. So Satyaki's just given us some really interesting ideas about what's going on in their airport and how that's being rolled out across other Indian airports and airlines. So let's take a question on polling strategies. In terms of airports, what is your airport prioritizing? It doesn't mean you don't have to work for an airport to answer this. You might just be an airline working with them that you can see what's going on, or a passenger going through, or a partner. Where is the process focusing? Should really have some background music to encourage people to respond faster. You can choose more than one option, by the way, obviously, as you can see on screen. And the panelists can all vote as well. Just a reminder to people while they're voting, again, I can see a lot of comments coming in just to the panel. Please make sure you choose the option of commenting to all panelists and all participants so that everyone else can see your great comments, because hopefully we'll get more of a conversation going there. And do look at the questions that are coming in and vote for the ones that you'd most like to see answered. Okay, I'm going to end the polling there and share the results. So, looks like self-service and social distancing the winners, with touchless curb to cabin and then economic survival coming in for about a third of you. Interesting stuff. Okay, let's take some of the questions that are coming in. There's a couple here that I think are interesting. We'll fire this one at you. So this is from René Hopstachen. We'll start with you, Satyaki, but then we'll pass it around to see if anyone else wants to answer, and I'll put you all back on gallery view. What do you expect will happen with the measures that are now being taken in the industry when a COVID vaccine becomes available on a global scale? There's an interesting question. Who wants to have a go at that? Will these things stay, or will we drop them as fast as we can?
I mean, from our perspective, I think the biometrics and the Digiyatra sort of program will still have significant traction, because I think frequent travelers, and many of our travelers are frequent travelers, really like the convenience that such a system gives them. And they like sort of getting through the airport even as a frequent traveler. I think that the touchless system and biometrics makes that significantly faster and easier. I certainly think that all of our data analytics and business intelligence will continue to stay. And I think sanitation, regardless of the vaccine or otherwise, will not go away. I think the world has suddenly woken up to the fact that we were probably not living very sanitized lives, and I don't think that's going to change. And if anything, I think people will become far more, let me put it this way, far fussier about the fact that places are not very clean. I think that's not going to reduce. So I think some of those key trends that you see will probably continue to stay. The use of PPE and things like that probably will drop once a vaccine is developed. And I think some of those elements might probably, the effects of those might get reduced. But I think a lot of the trends that you're seeing aren't going to go away regardless of a vaccine. I certainly think people will start flying a lot more once the vaccine comes. And I'm pretty hopeful of that. I'm an optimist. And people will come back to the office sooner than other people think, simply because I think you go to the office not just to sort of do work, but also there's a social aspect of being in the office that is sort of very, very underrated. And I think already a lot of our folks who've been away for 60 days and working from home and constantly on Zoom calls and sort of, or Microsoft Teams and things like that, are pretty desperate to come back to the office and see real people and have real interactions, etc. So I think that will also sort of evolve.
Okay, Clyde, let's bring you in on that one. What happens to all these measures when we're all vaccinated?
It's interesting. I've been on several calls with a number of innovation professionals in airlines, and especially with the American airline professionals. They're really worried that this is another 9/11 moment where there is going to be a number of regulations put in place which can't be rolled back. And I think there's a concern there. I'm my belief is that people will travel. I think we're going to be heading for another golden moment within travel where the real true joy of travel will come back, because people will see what they have missed during this period of time. And we're seeing this indications as well that people are really want to travel, but people are now conscious of how clean places are, whether that has anything to do with transmission or not. People will want to have the sense that the environments they're in are clean. There's also, people will be less patient in standing in airport queues. I think that's airport queues and check-in are going to be something where there's going to be less and less tolerance. But I think people will be back flying in the same numbers. I think people will travel and will actually want to have more of an experience when they're travel, because now we have lost a period of time where people are there. I think one of the things which we're looking at is how do you get people, because business travel is going to be down because of the rise of Zoom, but also companies not wanting people to travel for business. How do you get people back, especially startups and SMEs and small businesses? They need to be out there. So how do we develop that? So I am more bullishly optimistic than Satyaki. So I feel people will really want to travel. I think the measurements which are put in place are sensible in certain aspects, but we need to be careful that there's not going to be over-regulation. Like the regulation of keeping a middle seat free in an airline is idiotic, and it's just not workable. And we'll see. We need to be careful in terms of where the regulations are and how this is actually having an impact. Okay, I'm going to move on to Marta, but I'm also going to say, and this is probably the last time I'm going to say this, to the people commenting in the chat box and asking questions, make sure you send those to all panelists and all participants so everyone can see them, because the panel members don't have time at the moment to answer those and listen to each other. But B, if you're asking a question, it's probably better to put it in the Q&A section, and then it can be upvoted and there's more chance of it being answered. So Marta, let's go to you, and then Karin will end with you, and then we'll go into you talking about what you're doing. So Marta.
Thank you, Rohit. I just wanted to pass the ball back at Satyaki, as I know he was raising his hand to add to what Clyde was saying, if you want to.
So I just want to make one point. I was actually as bullish as Clyde. I think travel will come back in a big way. And I was just, I didn't say, I think somebody thought I was saying January or something. I don't. I think the minute the quarantine stuff goes away.
I hope it is January.
Either between countries or between states in India, I really think people will start traveling again. I mean, I'm very bullish and optimistic about traveling. Yeah.
Marta.
I completely agree with both Satyaki and Clyde, and just wanted to expand a little bit on Satyaki's point that technology such as biometrics and self-service and contactless travel is something that would be beneficial in the longer term. So I think the main priority and focus needs to be on implementing technology that would have a long-term impact, and not just something that would be completely directed to the COVID-19 crisis. And perhaps, I don't want to sound negative, but perhaps there would be a crisis of a similar sort in the future as well. So this is just a really good preparation for something that could occur of a similar sort in the future as well.
Great. Karin, let's take your answer to that question, but then let's go into your explanation of what you're doing around innovation and your plans for the future. We'll just take a few minutes to do that. So first answer the question and then tell us what you're up to.
Well, I'm also optimistic, so I also believe that air travel will come back. I also believe in the long-term benefits, as we mentioned before. I think a lot of these solutions, digital solutions, innovations don't only reply to the challenges caused by COVID, it replies to the challenges at the airports with optimization of resources, optimization of passenger flows, and so on. So I think many of the things that are going on right now will continue afterwards in terms of optimization of the airport. And what's going on at Swedavia's airport, as I will not go into, we have specific task force working on the safe travel of both passengers and personnel. That's our main priority, but I wanted to tell you a bit about what we are looking at going forward. I came into it a bit earlier. I think the use of data to gain insights and to make right decisions and actions in the airport will become increasingly important. We have seen this both using data from our queue measuring systems, which we'll now also be using to monitor social distancing. We've also looked into the use of Wi-Fi triangulations and other sources of data to be able to monitor passenger flows and gain insights from that. I think another big area we've been into it a bit, some call it digital twin, different types of data simulations in the airport. We also have a dedicated team working on different types of simulations on different scenarios going forward. And we also have that's more of a small trial, but we have some students working with a gaming engine on Unreal to simulate passengers flows through the security check to see if that could be something where we can learn even more insights from. We have a different type of IoT solutions in place, for example, soap dispensers in the bathrooms and so on. And I think that kind of insights, optimizing the maintenance or optimizing planning at the airport will also be increasingly important going forward. We've also used the data from our queue measuring systems to optimize our indoor climate control in a trial that had a very positive outcome, so we will look at that as well. But I think that kind of gaining information and insights to optimize the airport will be increasingly important as we have a variety of passengers and they have different constraints at the moment. And in addition to that, we are looking into trials of autonomous cleaning robots and that kind of sanitization projects also going forward.
Great. And so before we talk about the future a little bit more, in terms of you said you've got various committees focusing on different aspects of the nearer term. Which of those is seen as the highest priority right now, or which 2 or 3 are seen as the highest priority initiatives in terms of what Swedavia airports do right now?
Well, the highest priority is to ensure that we align with recommendations from health authorities, and we have a continuous dialogue with them to see which measures to be implemented and how, and to align that across all our 10 airports so the passenger has the same experience independently on which airport they can come to.
Okay. I'm going to take a polling question now. We've got another polling question around airports. So it was actually around collaboration. So you touched on working with the health authorities. Let's take a question on polling to see what we see as being the biggest collaboration priorities as a group of participants. Where do we need the most collaboration right now to drive the air transport industry forward? Let's give you a few more seconds to vote. Great. Let's put those up on screen so you can see the results there. It's interesting. So well, Karin, can you see the results?
No, unfortunately, I can't.
Okay, I'm going to read them to you. The options are the highest ranked with 62% of the votes is consistent processes in airports. That's interesting. And that compares to just 24% wanting consistent processes in aircraft. The second highest is common ICAO standards on cleaning, social distancing, PPE with 57%. And then government data sharing on potentially infected passengers, only about a third one, that 31%. So different structures. Does that surprise you at all? Do any of those that airports come out as the most important, that having consistent airport processes is seen the most important thing?
I think the consistency is something that will ensure the confidence in the passengers. And I think as you fly from one place to another, you hope, as a passenger, I think you hope to see the same kind of measures, so you will be prepared for what to expect. So I don't think that's so surprisingly that comes up as a high ranking. But something that I think is interesting as well is now we speak about airports, across airports, but I think we will also see what about the rest of the societies, what will happen when you go on buses or trains or other transport means. How will the measures look in those areas?
Okay. Now let's take a question from the audience. There are a couple that are to do with aircraft and airlines, so I'm saving those for when Clyde and Marta talk. But we've got a nice one here for you to lead off on, then we'll bring the panel in on this. It's from Tieng Sirig. Building confidence in passengers to fly again is one thing, but government decisions preventing people from flying is a bigger issue. Flight bans, 14-day rule, etc. So how are airlines and airports working with governments to encourage opening up the industry again, especially for international travel? What's your airport doing around working with the government to get some sort of global consistency on this, or open up on this? Any thoughts, Karin?
We work there as well. We are involved in discussions and dialogue with ACI, EASA, and different working groups on to how to ensure a collaboration and a consistency.
Okay. Do any of the other panel members have a thought on what's being done with governments to try and create more global consistency? Anyone want to share a view?
So I think, Rohit, I was actually surprised by the answers of the poll. I thought the quarantine issue would probably be the most pressing issue in terms of opening up travel. I think that's the single biggest issue that most people or most travelers are nervous about in terms of, will I get quarantined if I go? So if I'm actually going to only make a 3-day trip, am I having to fly, stay 14 days somewhere in quarantine, do my work, come back, and again get quarantined for another 14 days. So to me, unless you can get some consistency with respect to the quarantine procedures, I don't think you'll see too much international travel anywhere. That's the first thing. The second thing, as far as what we're doing with our governments, I think, it depends on, and I would say that there are probably two types of airports. I think airports such as Singapore, Changi, or Hong Kong, or Dubai, or Abu Dhabi, or Doha, etc., which rely primarily on international transfer traffic and which have little or no domestic traffic. For them, it's a question of existence, it's a question of survival, and it's a question of connecting their city-states with the rest of the world. And for them, I think it's far more important as far as international quarantine protocols go. In our case, at this point, we've just opened up 4 days ago the domestic travel market, I mean, at least as far as India is concerned, but we're a very large domestic market. So I think as far as the government of India is concerned, their primary goal at this point is to first get some sort of stability and some sort of process standardization as far as domestic operations is concerned. And I think they are working very actively behind the scenes with respect to what sort of protocols will need to be in place to open up international travel corridors. And that's a conversation they're having both internally within the government, as well as, I'm sure, with other sort of like-minded governments, ICAO, and various other sort of ACI, IATA, etc., who are constantly sort of interacting with them. I think it'll happen. I think definitely there will have to be a bit more sort of standardized protocols as far as that is concerned. But sooner or later, I think governments will come to the conclusion that, you know, COVID is here to stay. It's not going to go away. What we're going to have to figure out is a system to deal with COVID and sort of, you know, minimize risk. And there's not much else we can do. I think the world has to sort of figure out a way of living around it. We all have to go on with our lives, with or without COVID, and people will travel again. And we can't live the way we are right now. And I think, you know, we're taking baby steps right now in every country. And I think every country is trying to do what it can from sort of a domestic protocol perspective. But in the next 30 to 60 days, I expect to see some movement as far as international borders are concerned as well. And I'm sure there will be a system that will be developed that will get sort of, let's say, more sophisticated and better and improvised as you move forward. You know, and it's trial and error. And I think we'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to add into the mix as well the fact that this isn't just a clean conversation about travel. There are also all sorts of political and economic tensions that were there before, that will be there afterwards, that will impact the bilateral, you know, agreements that get made or not made, or the rules that get applied to certain countries. So it'll be fascinating, for example, to see what happens between China and the US. You know, what will the rules be about traveling between the two? And Clyde, Marta, do either of you want to come in on this and the kind of government approaches to quarantine? Do you have any views you want to share? If not, we'll move on. Okay, move on. Tactfully avoiding this one, right? Let's take you next, Clyde. Let's take the airline perspective. What are you doing? What's going on? What are you focusing your efforts on? How's it going?
So Viva Air Labs is an innovation lab, so we have to think forward. So we really came out quite quickly to feel how are we going to build confidence, because we really feel that that was going to be one of the biggest challenges. And also, how do we look at, as I said previously, how do you get people back traveling who is essential for their businesses? So we've always been a very startup focused labs, and also how do we help with the economies of the countries which we serve? So how do we help with the small and medium businesses, primarily in Colombia, but also in Peru? So we were one of the first airlines to really come out with a challenge. So we went out to the people who fly with us, and our own staff, actually staff from our competitive airlines, submitted proposals really to look at how do we as an airline build confidence, but also what is the passengers and the industry thinking around how do you get people back flying. And it was a really interesting process for us, because we had just close to 1,000 applications, which was amazing, from 30 separate countries. A lot of those were really centered around PPE, but a lot of them, one of the clear view which we'd seen coming through that was, as I said previously, there was a clear joy for travel. People were going, when can we get back and can we fly? But we want to make sure that we are safe when we fly, but also that this is not going to be prohibitively expensive. Because if you look at it in a South American context, it's only recently that the majority of the population has had the chance to fly, both domestically and internationally, open up to them. Low-cost carriers such as ourselves and others have given that democracy of travel. So now with COVID come in, a lot of the population saying, well, this is something which is very new to us, being able to travel, be able to travel to meet our family, be able to travel to others, and that's being removed. So I think there's a duty for airlines such as Viva Air to make sure that air travel is maintained, but also it's maintained in a way that the populations in the countries can afford it, and also people are able to help that scale their companies and scale their industry. We're in the process, we've narrowed it down to 10 ideas. It took us a very long time to go through 1,000 applications, so we're working through those because it's really important that the idea which we select is something which is implementable, so something which is actually going to make a real difference. So we're probably at the stage where we're going to get that through in the next week or so, and we're going to announce that publicly. But I feel for us, it's really our job as the innovation function is to really look at what is going to happen post-COVID, because there's going to be regulations, and that's more for the operational team. But for us, it's how do we get people back? How do we develop services? How do we develop potential new auxiliaries which are going to help with revenue? And that's really the function which we've been focusing on.
And can you give us any insights into what some of the hottest ideas might be that you're going to try and pursue?
I think some of the things which we're looking at is, again, that as how do you make business travel easier for people who are working in small companies? That came through really. One of the most common ideas is how to look at making payments for tickets and travel and experiences easier. There's been a fintech revolution in South America, but even with that, it's still largely a cash-based economies. And in fact, as an airline, up to 30% of our tickets are still paid in cash. And I think in a post-COVID world, we're looking to move payments more and more digital. And there was a lot of applications looking at how, as an airline, we do more of that digital transformation. So I think I would agree with the other panelists. This is really the opportunity for that moment of digital transformation, really from the start. Last mile mobility was a big topic because it's a challenge in South America. Often getting to the airport is more expensive than the airline ticket. So, and it's looking at that being safe. I think we can, as airlines and airports, we can make our planes safe, and we're very confident that our planes are safe. We've HEPA filters, we're disinfecting our planes, the airports have their procedures, but how do we know how the passengers are getting to the airport? So I think last mile mobility is going to be more and more of a challenge. And actually one of our top 10 was a completely novel solution around last mile mobility, which we really like. And I think that's, as an airline, we're looking at more and more, how do we get involved really from the passengers home to their destination? How do we get involved in that? And how we work with airports to make sure that that's not only a safe process, but actually a frictionless process for passengers.
Excellent. Of the ideas, this is my last question, I promise. Of the ideas that have come through, are any of them, would you say, truly transformative? That even though you're quite a compact and sort of new airline, does anything really sort of turn the airline on its head and completely redesign its model? Is there a kind of Uber or Airbnb moment in there for you as an airline in the ideas that have come through?
Yeah, I'll be setting it up myself, running off of it. No, I think the ones which we've seen have been really, one of the most transformative was actually about the airport and changing the concept of an airport. And I think that's more and more where the concept of airports haven't really changed in a long time. And I think a lot of people see that this is potentially a change for the whole structure of what an airport is and what an airport should be. And I think one of our top 10 was really completely a brand new idea, which would completely disrupt what an airport is.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay, let's take a, this is a good time to take a question when we're talking about industry futures. Let's look at this one around, given that we've been talking about revenue generation and economics, and we've heard people like Willie Walsh say that BA might not be back to 2019 levels till after 2023, and a lot of the industry talking about 80 to 90% of 2019 being the new normal by 2023. What's the audience's view of where we'll be as a sector as airlines by 2023? What's going to happen to revenues? And while we're doing that, Clyde, I'm going to give you a question that's come in, the most popular question we've had from Eric Popil, who's been waiting very patiently for us to answer this. And his question is, aircraft typically have to be 70% full for airlines to break even. Jet fuel and employees are the top two expenses for airlines. If airlines have to reduce passengers due to social distancing, how much thought has been given to reducing pilots, in brackets very costly, and cabin crew, and replacing them with autonomous systems, pilots, and service robots, cabin crew? Are we moving to fully autonomous planes? Willie Walsh wants it. Is it going to happen? Is social distancing going to happen on a plane as well?
So this question comes up a lot. So that's why I'm laughing. The challenge with this, and I've said this to the portfolio startups, and which I work with, is that it's going to be really, really difficult for an airline to do something major in terms of investing in something like a major automation of robots, because there's no revenue apart from AAG, who obviously are sitting on a nice little cash egg. But I think it's going to be really, really difficult. I think if you look at an airline, an aircraft as such, aircraft hasn't really changed. There hasn't been a moment where there's been huge disruptions since the time of Concorde. If you look at a cockpit, cockpits haven't changed. If you look at how communication from a cockpit, it's using mainly radio technology, which has been from the 1930s. So I would love to see the day where we have more automation and artificial intelligence, but that's really a question for the OEMs. And the OEMs are equally in a way that they're going to not be able to afford to do very much around this area. So I feel it's something where it should be coming down the pathway. We're seeing lots, like I know from Propeller Shannon, we're seeing lots of technologies and new technologies, both around artificial intelligence, especially around autonomous transport using small passenger drones. We're also seeing a lot of activities around making air traffic control better. But I think the challenge is at the moment is that it's very difficult for an airline to say, right, we're going to be doing this amount of investment, where they just, until we get passenger numbers back up, we're just not, it's going to be very difficult to invest in this.
Okay, excellent answer. I tend to agree with you. I think it's very expensive, and in safety critical times, people are going to be very nervous about looking left and not seeing a pilot, or seeing overhead robots bringing your food or whatever it is you're ordering. So let's have a look at the results. Interesting. So we have a tie pretty much in terms of somewhere around 90 to 100% is where the most common answers are. And we've got slightly more people, in fact, probably more people expecting revenues to be lower by 2019 than higher. I'm sorry, by 2023, expecting lower revenues in 2019 than higher. An interesting mix there. One very optimistic person, he's only one down there, thinking we're going to be at 140% or more of 2019 revenues by 2023. We want to be in the bar with you when we're buying drinks. Okay, let's now move on to Marta. Marta, you waited very patiently. You've heard what these other people have to say. It's time for you to put us all straight. What's really going on? What are we seeing? What's happening? What haven't we talked about?
Thanks, Rohit. So I'll start by listing some of the initial priorities in terms of innovation, of course. And we have already mentioned that it's important to remember that while this crisis has put immediate growth ambitions on hold, it also possesses a real opportunity for meaningful innovation and transformation to be accelerated, as we've heard from the previous panelists. As the reports highlighted, we see that the main investment priorities will be in digital transformation, automation, sustainability, innovation, and customer experience. But there are also four other aspects that I would like to focus on. So the first aspect would be driving efficiencies and cost reductions across the business while airports and airlines are suffering from the financial difficulties. Another aspect is the commercial bounce back is also getting a lot of focus right now. In fact, we're hosting a FT Ancillary virtual event next week where we'll hear a lot of insights from some leading airlines on how they're evolving their commercial approaches. So that would be really interesting. And finally, as we've mentioned already, contactless technology and sanitization in the airport terminal, and of course in flight, would be paramount to bringing back passenger confidence, restarting the industry, and also restarting the global economy. So these are the four core priorities, I believe, would be the main focus. At FT, we also speak to airlines and airports on a daily basis, and we have keeping a close eye on, as you said, what's going on. And we have seen that there have been various examples of innovative solutions being implemented in response to the crisis. So beyond the obvious measures to tackle the challenges around sanitization and hygiene, we have also seen some cutting edge technology that has been implemented, and we have already covered some of it, but I'll just briefly sum it up. So for instance, as we said, we have seen that contactless air travel will become essential. The likes of United Airlines, Etihad, AirAsia, Avalon Airport have already implemented touchless kiosks. And as Satyaki mentioned earlier, some are taking this further with the whole parking to boarding contactless passenger experience, which is going to be really interesting. And this combined with biometric technology implemented throughout the passenger journey will definitely help airlines, airports, and their partners to ensure a low-touch airport experience. And importantly, as I highlighted earlier as well, and some of the other panelists did, this would be really beneficial in the longer term when the industry gets back to the pre-COVID-19 traffic. And pre-COVID-19 traffic, we saw that there were a lot of capacity constraints. So this type of technology will really help with the current crisis, but also ahead. Again, robotics was mentioned, and how Hamad Airport, Pittsburgh, Hong Kong, Incheon Airport have also adopted it. And also mobile-enabled passenger journey and putting the control back into the hands of the passenger would be extremely important. This again is something Satyaki mentioned with their latest parking to boarding experience. Where Bangalore Airport is implementing pre-ordering F&B capabilities on the passenger smartphone. AirAsia is also doing something similar and enhancing the app capabilities so that guests can scan their passport via the app itself. And another interesting trend that we think is going to emerge out of the crisis is the adoption of offsite processes. So we haven't really mentioned much about this today, but I think it is really going to be quite important, and from offsite health verification even, so that the passenger would know whether they're able to fly before they have reached the airport, but also offsite baggage drop and remote downtown terminals as well could be a thing of the future. We have also seen an interesting initiative recently by United Airlines, for instance, which have started a new partnership with the consumer cleaning products company called Clorox. So perhaps there would be also an upsurge in unique partnerships of this nature to, again, boost the passenger confidence. And finally, one more thing that we have been keeping a close eye on is the idea of digital health passports. But we're yet to see more development around this concept, of course, and we'll see perhaps airlines and airports adopting this. And another point is that at FT, we have worked on a think tank document to provide guidance to airports, airlines, and their partners, which will be published next week. So I would like to encourage everyone that's tuned in today to keep an eye out for that next week, because there would be some really good insights as well.
Excellent. Thank you. So of all the things that you're seeing right now across the piece, which are the ones that you think could have the most sustainable long-term benefit in terms of, you know, helping airlines and airports really improve their efficiency, their operations, or their revenue generation? Which do you think are the game changer ideas out there?
Yeah, so as I said, contactless technology and biometrics will definitely be something that we would see in the longer term. In fact, biometrics is already something that has been on the agenda for some time now. And it's good to see that the COVID-19 crisis has actually accelerated the need for this type of technology. So yeah, if we look further ahead, I believe that biometrics will be the new norm. But of course, here the challenge would be for airlines and airports to work hand in hand with governments and regulatory bodies to ensure that the biometric use cases can be expanded in a safe and secure manner as well. And I think there would definitely be a renewed focus on the customer experience. And in fact, here I would like to highlight a recent statement from Dublin Airport's Head of Insight and Planning, Jan Richards, during one of the FT webinars. She really did stress the importance that focusing on customer experience during and after a recession can have returns that are 3 times higher. So perhaps this is a really important focus as well. And passengers would be expecting a high level of service, even when flying on low-cost airlines, which typically have a reputation of overlooking the customer experience aspect. But I think Clyde might disagree, of course. And I believe this would now be a real differentiator. Also, another thing I want to highlight is in between all of these new priorities, we mustn't forget the important work that has already been put in place to improve the travel experience for people with reduced mobility as well, and create an inclusive travel experience. We have seen a lot of trials in the past 1 to 2 years using robotics and automated vehicles by Etihad and Abu Dhabi airports, for instance, Japan Airlines, JFK, British Airways, All Nippon Airways as well, and many others. And focusing on the in-flight experience a little bit, I think environmentally friendly initiatives such as in-flight pre-ordering of food and beverage and also duty-free would also become a common sight so that airlines don't have to carry that unnecessary load. Sustainable packaging of in-flight products, as I think it was mentioned earlier, packaged blankets and single-use cutlery. That's all great, but we really need to ensure that this is done in a sustainable way. And I think there were some questions from the audience about sustainability, so these are my views.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you. That's very comprehensive. Let's take your polling question now. So Marta has raised the polling question for us, our final polling question around future investment. And while we're doing that, I'm going to bring the rest of the panel back in. You've all been sat dutifully listening. We have a question from Katsiariana. Oh, sorry, I've just slaughtered your name. Alimpieva. You know who you are, but no one would recognize you from the way I've pronounced it. The question you've got is, what's the future of chatbots for self-service and navigation through the airport, considering that the engagement rate of airport apps is quite low? let's throw this open to the airport folks first, and then if Marta or Clyde have anything they want to add to that, then you're welcome to, while we're voting on tech investment. Karin, do you want to go first on that? What's the potential for chatbots in the airport environment as you see it?
Well, we have introduced a chatbot, and it supports our passengers well. It's not on our app, so it's on Messenger. So I think being in different digital channels is important to reach the customers in different. We have our own app, but we also have the chatbot, and we have other channels to reach the passengers. So I think chatbots can be of use even in the future, going forward.
Thank you. Satyaki.
So from my perspective, Rohit, I think just as Karin said, we're in the process of re-engineering our airport app, and the chatbot is a feature that we will enable in the course of the coming months. And I think it has potential. But I think with respect to some of these technologies that I think Marta so nicely outlined, I think from my perspective, the single biggest change that you're going to see in terms of acceleration as far as everything is concerned is this thing that we hold in our hands. I think sooner or later, everything from, even the health screening, the digital passport or the travel document, everything that we do, both from sort of making, for instance, a booking for getting our bags picked up at home and delivered to our destinations, now you have Uber and the equivalent for getting to and from the airport, for every process as you go through the airport, and potentially for F&B, both at the airport and within the airline, etc. I think what COVID is probably going to do is going to accelerate the transition to the mobile phone for so many of our processes. So I think one of the interesting things is going to be, again, if you have so many apps, what potential app are you going to use? Is it the airport? Is it the airline? Is there going to be some sort of integration at some point, at least with your hub-based carriers or your major carriers? And I think, to me, a lot of the things that we're doing right now might be individual responses to COVID. But I think what you're going to see in terms of the long-term or the medium to long-term transition is going to be the even quicker or the even faster acceleration to getting the mobile phone to do most things, including take pictures of yourself, do a health check, get a sign off from a track and trace application that will tell you whether you're ill or not, be able to communicate with government, etc., and maybe even give you your border clearance and entry in terms of saying, yeah, you're screened to travel and you're allowed, etc. So I think that we're going to see revolutionary stuff happening as far as the phone is concerned. And I think that will really drive a lot of the contactless as well, because with biometrics and contactless enabled and the right sort of applications on your phone, I think that's really where the future is.
Okay. Clyde, do you have a view on this? Because I've got another question I think I might throw at you, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's something, my concern, and I was just about to show my phone, look, this is a number of apps I have. The airports tend to run into developing an app which nobody uses. So I think there's also going to be a challenge when we're at a stage where investment is difficult, that if they're spending money on this, then they've got the wrong priorities. So I think there needs to be, as Satyaki said, there needs to be, I could see a time where, because we need to have more regulations coming down, that there may be a universal app or a company which develops a universal app between airports, especially airports, because there's no way I'm downloading an airport app for every airport which I've been in, because it's just my phone would die. So I think there's a chance. I think there is an opportunity for a standardization here, where, especially for airports, where you have wayfinding maps and a chatbot which serves many airports. Whether airports will ever agree to it, I don't think so, but I think there is an opportunity here.
Great. Okay, your polling question, the results are in now, Marta. We've been polling it for a while. Do you want to comment on what we see there? Just for those that can't see the screen, contactless technology comes out top with 70%, followed by biometrics with 63%, then automation with 38%, Robotics and AI, it's still not a favourite at 33%, and then off-site processing at 17%. Any surprises there, Marta?
I wouldn't say there are many surprises there, and I think it's quite obvious that contactless technology, and coupled with biometrics, as I was saying earlier, will be leading this transformation. And now, I mean, no surprise that we have already seen many airlines and airports adopting the contactless style technology. So yeah, I completely agree with the poll as well.
I think if you split robotics and AI, certainly robotics you might see a bit more. I think we'll see a lot of AI, but no one will know they're seeing it. It will just become embedded in applications, and we'll stop talking about it, other than some really big game-changing ones where people do some incredible things in the way they're running their airline and airport, and then put their hands up and say, actually, this is an AI algorithm that's doing it. We've got another question coming. We've got some time. Let's take a few of these questions. Let's do quick fire answers now, sort of 60 seconds or less. This is from Maxine Most, who's asked quite a few questions, but this one's still visible. How will airlines deal with COVID-19 or future public health crises when individual countries are managing the crisis in very different ways and to different standards? This goes to the trust issue. How do you instill trust of the safety in an airport or on a plane with varying levels of standards implemented globally? Who wants to go first on that one?
So actually, IATA tweeted this today. I feel an airline is probably the most safest, one of the more safest environments for you to be in. They're disinfected, they're up clean, and also with HEPA filters, the air has been filtered. So I feel the challenge is not the airline. I think the challenge is the environments outside the airline. I think the airline has done, airlines and the technologies, especially we fly Airbuses, there's nothing more we can do here. So I think it's more to do that. I think there's always going to be different regulations in every country, but I don't think an airline can do anything more. Okay. We're at that point.
Anyone got anything to add to that? Doesn't look like it. Okay, let's take the next one. This is from Damien Arnaud. How will you handle the impact of health screenings on no-shows at boarding gates that will increase the ground operations offloading of luggage for absent travellers? This I think is a really interesting one, that the number of people who get tested or screened and suddenly we say you're not getting on the plane because your temperature's too high. I think there's a couple of different impacts to that. One is the offloading of the baggage, but the other is the mood of that passenger. You know, what do we do about unhappy passengers? Anyone got a view here? How are we going to handle this? Fine now when you've got relatively small numbers, but if we start to get to 60, 70%, 80% load factors and higher volumes of flights, what are we going to do? Who wants to go at that one?
So I think, Rohit, from my perspective, I think technology will evolve to the point where as you go through the different processing points, right, in an airport, and as you're doing the health checks and as you're getting results more in terms of real time, and as you're tracking the passenger through the airport, I think some of the stuff will become apparent before they even get to the gate. And I think you will get to the stage where, you know, we will have a fairly good indication of who's at what point in the terminal. And if we need to make such decisions, how can we communicate it, again, through either the app or the chatbot or whatever mechanism we choose to push a message or a notification to the passenger or customer or to the airline to potentially call that passenger to the gate or whatever and make that call so that the bags aren't even loaded. I think we will see that it will evolve to that. It may not happen today, but I think in 4 or 5 years' time, I think airlines and airports will get to the level of interaction where certainly at the busier airports, you will find enough technology and enough capability for us to make these sorts of decisions well in advance, in most cases, of last-minute glitches at the gate.
Okay. Karin, what about your perspective? Is there any difference from Swedavia's perspective on how we deal with this?
Currently, health screenings, there's no decision on that from the Swedish government on implementing. But I think, as mentioned, I think it's important to get the information out early and be very clear about the information in different steps, and to ensure as early on as possible in the passenger process that you know if you can or cannot go on your plane.
Okay.
So I think the first step is very, very, very clear information from both airlines and airports to the passengers on what to expect and what are the rules and conditions. Great.
We've got a question here. I'm going to throw it out. If no one's got an answer, that's fine. It's from Brock Hinsman. Hi, Brock. I'm interested in the future impact of the Chinese commercial aircraft industry. Does anyone have any insights? Oh, secondly, second part of the question. So anyone got any views on China's commercial aircraft industry? And secondly, does anyone have any insights on the impact of additive manufacturing on the industry? No is a perfectly acceptable answer. So no one is showing me that they have any inclination to answer this. Sorry, Brock, we've got a on that one. We've got lots of questions for you, Satyaki, about India and its solutions. Here we go. Here's a good one. Marta, you can lead on this one. I'll put you on the spot. This is from Maxine Most again. How will travel come back to pre-COVID-19 levels when businesses are learning that so much prior travel was not really essential? Are you counting on business travel or leisure travel filling the gap? Let's start with you. You're looking across the industry. What are we seeing? What are the captains of aviation saying when they get together about what's going to drive us back to glory days?
So the first part of the question is that prior travel was not really that essential. I think in terms of business travel, for instance, there would always be a need to get together and really discuss things in person. So both in business and leisure travel, I think there would still be a need to travel. And that really wouldn't be prevented from the COVID-19 crisis. I think perhaps in the short term, yes, as we said, there would be some problems such as the quarantine period, but perhaps in a few months this would be different, and I think the travel industry would definitely restart again.
Okay. Who else wants to talk about that one? Go ahead, Clyde, and then...
I think this is going to be more a question of commercial versus business travel. I think you need to separate those two. So I think internationally there's going to be less people on flatbeds and legacy carriers. I think there's going to be less of large corporates willing to send their teams or their people in business class across long distances. But I think domestically, you're going to have people still doing commercial travel. You're going to have small businesses and companies which are needing to do face-to-face to do sales, traveling domestically using aircraft. And I think that's the commercial travel will be back. I think where it's going to suffer is the big multinationals or the big consultancy houses which used to send 10 consultants in business class with the legacy carriers. I think they're going to see there's going to be a period of time before that's back.
Now they just all gather around one screen. Excellent. Karin, Satyaki, any thoughts on this? Going to come back first, and how's it going to come back?
So I think from our perspective, I believe that leisure travel will pick up a bit faster than business travel to start with, because I think companies are also, from a legal and regulatory perspective, far more reluctant at this point to send people anywhere. And most companies have sort of banned travel unless it's absolutely essential or for emergency medical reasons and things like that. And even from insurance and liability perspectives. So I think from that perspective, business will probably take a little longer to recover. But that said, I mean, I think I want to go back to something that Clyde mentioned. I think in a country like India, right, which is roughly 2,500 to 3,000 kilometers north to south and similar sort of extent east to west, air travel is by far the fastest and the safest and the most efficient way of getting around. And we have, you know, luckily or unluckily, I mean, depends on which way you look at it, we have 1.3 billion people, and many of them have to sort of get around from point A to point B. And if you take anything more than say 8 to 10 hours when you can go in your personal vehicle, for those of them who are lucky enough to have personal vehicles to make that distance, anything else, I mean, by far the safest, easiest, and most efficient way to travel is air transport. So I think that's not going to go away. And I think that's one of the reasons why in India, at least, we believe that the demand will come back to pre-COVID levels within 2 to 2.5 years, simply because of the latent demand, the size of the population, and the fact that people will have to go back to living their lives in some way and some degree of normalcy around COVID. So we will figure out a system, we'll figure out a methodology, but I think that traffic will return. I think he's right on the international, intercontinental sort of long haul travel. It might take longer, but even that, again, I think it depends. There might be two trends. One, the fact that you might actually see more people wanting to travel in business class or premium economy because they don't want to sit next to a bunch of people. I don't know. That could happen and depends on sort of the kind of travel we're talking about. But the other thing that might be interesting is to look at what's going to happen to general aviation. And I think you might find that some of the people who used to travel in business and first, at least, might end up, actually, there might be a transition over to general aviation. At least from an airport perspective, it's something that we've not looked at, for instance, as seriously. And I think there are going to be markets where general aviation becomes a bit more popular. And I certainly think that there are opportunities, between certain city pairs, especially with fractional jet ownership and things like that. And you never know. I mean, this could be the start of something interesting.
And with that, he's just had a job offer that's taken him out. Karin, any thoughts on how we get the recovery and the difference between business or leisure or business travel?
Not on that perspective, but I think going forward, the sustainability question will be also increasingly important. And at Swedavia, we have also high goals in transforming the industry into a more sustainable way of flying. So I think that is something also we need to consider and look at going forward.
Okay. Well, you've sort of led us into this question from Daniel Owen, which is great to get everyone's view on. What impact will COVID-19 have on the sustainability transformation in air transport? Karin, so you started talking about it. What's it done to the priority you're placing on sustainability in your internal conversations?
We have the same priority on sustainability, and we have still a goal. We will be zero carbon emission from our own operations at the end of this year. So we still have high sustainability goals. There have been some communication in the industry about some projects maybe put on hold regarding electrical aviations and so on, but I think that is something that will come going forward, and there are a lot of trials and tests and projects in Sweden regarding electrical aviation for domestic flights. Cool. So I think that will be part of the future.
Clyde, what's it done to your sustainability perspectives?
So I'm very strongly supportive of sustainability initiatives. I think prior to this, a lot of the sustainability within airlines was really focused on false sustainability, so offsetting. A lot of the major carriers had done these ridiculous offsetting processes without actually looking at how you can make your company more sustainable. And I think, again, it goes back into the whole ethos of low-cost carriers has been around efficiency. So therefore, sustainability center should be a really strong point. I was really disappointed with the CEO of Airbus coming out and saying that he's putting sustainability in the back foot. I think that was a regressive step. I think people who travel are now more and more expecting sustainability to be a part of both the airports and the airlines that they travel, and therefore that this is something which airports and airlines have to be better at and have to be looking at a point. I think now with oil prices being at rock bottom, it's not going to help matters much. We're around looking at alternative fuels, and also the expense of looking at hydrogen engines and other ways of electrifying aircraft is going to be difficult, especially if you don't have supportive OEMs looking at it. And I think for us, it's more and more looking at our processes and seeing where we can do it. And I know one of the questions is about embedded in-flight entertainment. That's one of the areas which we really strongly came out and said we're not going to put screens on, because screens create weight and that costs extra fuel to burn, so they cause pollution. And also most people watch stuff on their mobile, so more and more that's going to be looking at that. But I feel there needs to be more of a cohesive effort around sustainability. I think it's going to be challenging in the area, but in most airlines and airports, but I feel it should be part of our discussions, because we're at a point of change, and this is a point where we can really, while we're resetting the industry, that we really can make sustainability a focus of it.
Okay, we are coming very close to the end of time, so let's just take 30 seconds, literally, I mean, a genuine 30 seconds each from Satyaki and then Marta on what does COVID-19 do to sustainability efforts in the industry?
So I'll take this first. It's good to hear from Karin, for example, that sustainability is still on the radar for investment, and it's something that came up during the results from the research. There are two aspects I want to quickly go through. One of them is, in a way, the COVID-19 crisis perhaps pushing some airlines to get rid of older, less efficient aircraft. So that's a good aspect, and we will see more new models that are way more efficient. And another thing is as well that I pointed out to earlier is that we would see technologies such as pre-ordering of food and beverages and retail as well would be driving the fact that people can pre-order, so they wouldn't be necessary to carry so much load on the aircraft. Yeah, of course, I think technology would be one way that this can be achieved.
Okay, Satyaki, you have the last word on sustainability.
I think from our perspective, we've always sort of pushed sustainability in a big way, even before COVID. And I think what COVID is going to do, as Marta sort of alluded to, is in the first place, inefficient aircraft are really going to be taken out of the system. And that's already happening. We're seeing that. In the second place, I think we will, because of the need to conserve cash and to sort of think about what we're going to do with respect to P&L and sort of financial implications, I think we will move to a system in any case from, of increasing operating efficiency and controlling costs in a big way. So technology such as IoT, engineering, improvements in engineering, sustainability and maintenance, how we sort of think about sanitation, all of those things by definition will mean that we will move to a far more sustainable way of operating our airport. I think electric vehicles are also going to become sort of much more prevalent. We're going to see much more mobility options come to the table, and that's going to do shared riding, the use of Uber and similar sort of systems, the use of potentially baggage being taken separately, people being far more cognizant of the fact that they need to travel lighter. All of these things will mean that fundamentally, I think the carbon footprint, and again, airlines coming back slowly with respect to capacity in order to meet demand, will mean that at least for the next 2 to 5 years, you will see a natural reduction in terms of what we're doing with respect to carbon emissions. I think in the longer term, younger people are also, and this generation is far more, I think, aware and very, very conscious about the choices that they make. Information is readily available. And I think many of these events like COVID is making people stop and think about their choices. And I think that alone will also lead to the fact that, people are going to make much more conscious choices of making, choosing the right airline or choosing the right airport or choosing the right partner in terms of what are they doing with respect to community and sustainability. And hopefully one of the great things that come out of COVID is the fact that, the greater good for a larger number of people is taken as one of the key drivers rather than the sort of solely capitalist P&L based system that we've seen so far, at least for the last 15 or 20 years. And I think
great point to end on. I think we're going to end there.
You know, you live in hope.
But it's a great point to end on. Is this the end of the capitalist system? So just quickly say thank you to the panel members for being here. Thank you to all of you for taking part. The next survey is out running for the next report, which comes out in September. Get your camera out, take a picture of that web link. It's a way of getting the report without having to pay for it, because the next one is charged for everyone. Also, to let you know, obviously the first report is already out. It's free to airlines, airports, government agencies as well in aviation. The same for this report that's launched today. For everyone else, it's a mere $50, but because we're incredibly generous, those two reports are available for the next 48 hours at a discount of 40%. If you go to our website, which is shown at the bottom of the page, and type in coupon code 8040 at checkout, you can get those reports for 40% off, either report 1 or report 2. Don't be asking for reports 3 and 4. People tend to, after the webinars, ask for those. They're not out yet, but you can prepay and buy all of them if you want to with that offer at the end of the screen. And finally, just a little advert, our book on aftershocks and opportunities, where we've got 25 future thinkers from around the world. That comes out on Monday. And if you're interested, we have a 12-hour marathon summit where 22 of the contributors are going to be sharing their ideas and discussing them. So it's a chance for you to immerse yourself in every possible aspect of the future. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for taking part, for asking great questions, for engaging with each other on the chat, for challenging our panelists. And thank you to UiPath for sponsoring this and really making the whole thing possible. Hopefully see you at one of our future webinars. Thank you for Future Travel Experience for partnering with us. And once again, thank you to our panelists. If you could stay around, the rest of everyone else is more than welcome to leave now. I'm going to stop the recording great. Thank you very much for everyone for being here.
Thanks so much, Rohit. That was a